by breaking down some bottles. That seems like a very basic thing to start with, but there's some things that I think are much more helpful. You can simply take a hammer to a bottle and have a bunch of shards and be ready to go. I find that's much more mess than it's worth, because you end up with all these shards that are the wrong size to use. You end up with powdered glass that you don't want to inhale, and you might want to break a bottle into different parts to be able to use individual pieces of it. I have actually made many goblets out of wine bottles that are broken down specifically to different pieces. The top of the bottle becomes the stem and the foot, the bottom of the bottle becomes the cup. And so you can't do that by taking a hammer to it, so it's good to know how to break down a bottle. There are lots of different methods. You can buy bottle cutters online. They're really inexpensive, and then you just submerge them in hot and cold water respectively, and they pop apart. But because I am a glass artist, I don't do any of those in-your-sink things, because I think they're a little more dangerous than they need to be, honestly, and we have the proper tools, so we use the proper tools. And so to break down my bottles, I always start with hot popping them into their different sections, whether that's bottoms all the way to tops, in all these different slices in order to get nice pieces to work with. To do that, I take a bottle and I put it on a turntable, but in order to get it to actually break in an even ring, you need a place for the crack to start. Glass wants to break, that is what it is made to do, but it wants to break specifically. It doesn't want to break in a straight line, hardly ever, because glass is a non-mineral solid. So it is a fluid molecular structure it is an actual solid. Don't let anyone ever tell you that glass is a super cooled liquid. It's not. It is a solid, but it has the molecular structure of a liquid, which makes it want to shatter into big round shards, and that's called, it's a really fun word, you ready? It's called conchoidal cleavage. And so, if you want it to break in a straight line, you have to hint to it where you want it to break. And the best way to do that is to take your bottle and a simple glass cutter that you can get at the hardware store, and you're just going to make a straight little 1-inch score along the bottle. And so this bottle has some texture in it, and so I'm just going to go below the texture, because that thickness thin will give me a little hiccup, so I'm going to go just beneath it for the sake of the demo and the ease. I want to look like I know what I'm doing. And so we're going to just make a small, you're just going to hear it scratch, score in the bottle. About 1 inch or a 1/2 inch in length is enough. I have a little turntable. I bought this also online. You need one that spins evenly and quickly. If it's a slow turn and your fingers have to be in the way, that's just putting yourself in danger and it won't get even. You need it mostly centered. I have an extra little ring I've drawn at the diameter of average bottles to use. And then we're going to light this little micro torch. Go. Safety glasses on. So this is a technique in glass blowing called a hot pop. And so that's because you are going to pop the bottle into 2 pieces using some heat. So we're going to put the oxygen on this torch. It's a little micro blue flame. I'm going to get this bottle turning pretty quickly, and I can see my little score line right there. So once I've got this turning, I bring this down to right where that score line is. And I'm going to slowly in my head kind of count to the count of 17. 17 Mississippi is really kind of it. And then what they say about hot popping is just when you think it hasn't worked, it has. It kind of builds the suspense again and again and again. You're like, it's not going to do it. Until it does. And so once it does, my cut has gone almost all the way through it. And remember, you just hit that with a torch. That's all hot in there. And so set that back on the thing. It didn't go quite all the way around because I don't need like such a specific straight line. I'm not going to hit that with a torch anymore. I'm just going to pick the bottle up and tap it back down, and the bottle pops apart. Easy peasy. And then that's hot, so metal table. I'm allowed to put that down. And then I should have made 2 score lines, but I didn't, so we'll make another. Don't touch the hot edge. It'll cool down rather quickly. Score line. I should have done it first so that I would have kept it centered, but that's fine. Put it back. the reason I like to break down bottles this way, just stayed on. How convenient. And then, hard to talk and to do at the same time. I'm much better at the talking than the talking and the doing. All right, find my score mark, spin, spin, spin. Right on that line. Everybody count to 17 in your heads. Just when you think it's not going to work. It's one of those things where you're like, it's going to make a fool out of me. It's going to prove that it doesn't want to do it. I didn't have it quite centered. That should be fine. See? Sometimes it's more than the 17, and you just hold it until it does it. Just long enough that you think, all right, it really isn't going to work. But it does. And remember, the top is still hot from where we just knocked it apart. Oh, and this one. Ooh, see? It ran. So this is the conchoidal cleavage. Show our internet people, and then we'll show our in-person people. Conchoidal cleavage. See that ran really weirdly? So the reason it did that, and I should have known better, was I put my score mark on the seam line of the bottle, which gave it a second place to run away. So if you don't do that, you can see it ran right along the seam edge. My bad. I was just being like, I can do it quickly and not rotate the bottle. So that'll happen. Remember, that's hot. So if you need to tap it to get it all the way to break, use an apparatus. But it still comes off. And now you have 3 pieces. But wait, there's more. It's like a cooking show. We already have a centered cooled ring that we don't have to worry about so much. Now, the most annoying thing about this is that to use it really easily, you don't want a big, like, swinging shard. You want a strip of glass in order to make rods to use. And because of the way bottled glass is made, dropped into a mold, inflated immediately, and then formulated to cool down almost instantly, the outside of the glass is under tension from where it hit the mold. So the faster it cools down, the more tension it's in. And so the glass is actually more fragile on the inside than it is on the outside. And so if you want it to break easily, if you try and score it on the outside, it doesn't want to break. But if you put your score on the inside, it's really awkward because, of course, it's in there. But you make your score line on the inside, and then you flip it around and score it in a straight line going that way too. And then I roll it over 180 and put my score line, again, not on the seam lines of the bottles. Where it was 180. And then I put that score line this other side, and you're just wanting to hear that glass cutter kind of crunch, like nails on a chalkboard, but not as offensive. And as you crunch it, and then you should just be able to take it, tap it apart, and now you have something that's really easy to work with. I was a little overzealous there and gave it a spider crack. So you all make me nervous or something. Nobody usually watches this part. But then again, just score it, tap it, and you end up with these really nice, even strips. And these are what I use to break down into usable pieces, to pull into the kind of cane glass artists are used to working with. And I do that because it really loses almost no material. Whereas if you smash it with a hammer, you always end up with like teeny tiny shards and powder. And because it's just much more manageable. It's not going to swing on you unexpectedly and out of control. So that makes your life just a whole lot easier. So, for my glass artist folks that use a lot of glass, everyone always asks me, is it more like Boro or is it more like soft glass? And the answer is neither. It is in between in the most infuriating way. So if you're someone who uses both Boro and soft glass, fantastic. All your bad habits from both are going to come so in handy. If not, you're going to have to learn some extra moves in order to make this useful and safe. So there is a learning curve to using recycled glass. I think I can save you a lot of burns if you kind of follow the method I've developed. I have a couple little scars from when I started, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel, no reason to get matching scars. They're not matching tattoos. It's not as much of an honor. And so I'm just breaking down two different colors so that I can show you they do have slightly different working properties. And this sounds really ridiculous, but the more expensive the liquid that came in your bottle, the nicer the glass is to use. I don't know why, if the glass is thicker and so it has a more reasonable cooling structure in the mold in the factory, but really cheap beer bottles are dreadful. Wine bottles, a little bit better. Liquor bottles, that's where it's at. So like, you might get the same color from a Heineken bottle as you do from a Jameson bottle, but the Jameson bottle is better to use. And it just is. I've used both. I use both still, depending on what I have access to, but I prefer the Jameson bottles. And don't worry, you don't have to drink all the alcohol yourself. The second you tell people you are collecting colored glass, you will have more of it than you know what to do with in an hour. It happens so fast. Someone's like, oh, you need blue bottles? I have blue bottles. Oh, you need a specific shade of green? I have that. And if you need something really specific, just go to your local bar. They're having to pay to get rid of the bottles anyway. They'll hand them off to you for free. You just have to scrub them. Oh, people ask about taking off labels all the time. Hot water in the bottles to release the adhesive, and then just a straight razor. And then I did a poor job because I was hurrying, but you can also take like a little bit of steel wool and scrub the rest of the adhesive off. You don't have to use any of that nasty goof off or anything that smells really bad and it's bad for you. Elbow grease is the way to do it. If you do get bottles from your local dump or transfer station, watch for imperfections. This one clearly hit down in the hopper and has a huge ding in the corner of it. That's not a problem. We can still use it. But if you get a hot pop it, that is going to blow up in your face so fast. And the bottom of bottles, especially of things like bubbly wine and champagne bottles, are really, really thick. They're under the most stress. If you introduce that straight to a flame, oh man, does it make a loud bang in your house where everybody in the entire house comes running to see if you're alive. It's not hot yet, so it doesn't hurt, and it's small enough shards it doesn't hurt, but it's a lot of cleanup. Okay, so we have strips to work with. We have things to play with flame working wise, so we'll move over to this torch here.
Would you pop a square bottle?
Would I have a square bottle? I would, but I would alternate my hand a little bit so that I wasn't getting those corners quite as hot. So you just like move your hand away in and out, just a little feathery flame, and it will still hot pop just the same. I've also seen people score the long way fully on square bottles and then just bang them. And they sometimes pop apart in half that way for you, but they don't prefer it. Yeah.
Would you score on the flat side or the corner?
I would score on the flat side just so you have the most control. And then with a lot of bottles, the fancier you get, the more fancy their labels are, which is annoying. These have enameled labels on the edge. Some of them are now engraved instead of enamels, which is better. But the engraving, when you melt the glass, will give you a bubbly texture in the material that you pull. And if you have enamel, that stays, and it just looks like dirt in your piece forever. So pull that part out. It's nuts. Get rid of that. So we're going to make the material like we were just wanting it to be something you could purchase from the store. When glass artists buy color, they of course get it in pencil-like materials called canes. We're going to pull some canes out of the recycled glass so that it's a familiar type of material to work with. When I started doing this, I pulled canes that were much too thin. They were like stringers, and I was like, wow, it takes so many of these. And then I don't know how many months later, I was like, I could just pull thicker cane. That's allowed. So sometimes say your problems out loud, and it'll get fixed. And interrupt me with questions at any time. It's fine.
At some point, can you talk about the seam in the bottle? Because if they're blowing it out into a bottle, why is there a seam? It's a seam that the mold has?
It's a seam that the mold has. So when they make a bottle in a factory, it is a drop mold. So a hot blob of glass flows continuously out of a furnace, and then at just the right size, it cuts it off, it falls over the opening of a mold, falls down, starts to fold, and a pressure gun comes down over the top and goes, and it fills the mold, but the mold has to pop in half to let the bottle fall out the bottom to close again to catch the next one. So it's the seam line in the mold to get it out of the mold so it can hit the conveyor belt. And the whole process takes like 3 seconds in the factory. It's insane. If you want to waste a bunch of hours, look up bottle making factory on YouTube, and it's amazing. And then, once you've seen enough of that, look at bottle factory malfunctions on YouTube. Ooh, glass factory malfunctions are wild. My favorite being a place that was making the tubes for fluorescent lighting, and the end of one of them came off, and remind you, it's still fluid at that point, and it looked like it was a silly string dispenser of tubed glass, and it's a personless factory, so nobody was in harm's way, which is why it can be funny. But it was impressive to watch how much glass piled up before they were able to turn it off. There's usually a lot of piles of broken glass wherever the machine breaks down for a moment. Okay, so in order to do this, there are a couple different ways to pull the cane. I like the mandrel method. Some people swear by the Boro cane method. We're going to start with the mandrel method because it's my preferred, and you can tell I was doing this. Hello. Doing this recently. There's still glass on the ends of this, and I don't want that there. And so we're going to just get rid of it by dipping it in cold water to clean off the ends of these mandrels. When you're working with recycled glass, it is shockable. So instead of like if you were a Boro rod, you just in there and heat it up. For soft glass, you know you got to bounce. You got to bounce when it comes to, there it goes, temperature shocking. But I want it off, so we're not being that nice to it. Just going to heat that up a little bit. Once you heat it up, just dip that in water, and it all comes off. It's also a way you can make frit if you need it in another color. Frit is just the crushed up glass used to make nice colors of different things, patterns and such. You're welcome to do that with this by just heating up a bunch and dunking it in water. Just make sure you have a clean jar each time and dry it fully before you try and use it. Because you think it's temperature shocking now, you leave some water in your frit, that'll sizzle. Okay, heat that up. Just until it glows. The darker the color of the glass you're using, the better it glows. The only solid color of recycled bottle glass I've ever really worked with are the St. Brennan Irish cream bottles. They're like a really beautiful black, and that's because sunlight would actually be destructive to the Irish cream, so it can't have any light penetrate it. So it is the most dense color. It's really lovely to work with. I just didn't have one of those bottles on hand. We're going to start with the green one, actually. This is still a little warm for the record. Not so warm that glass blower can't touch it, but a little warm. So in order to introduce it into the flame as a shard, I have this set of pincers. They came from a thrift hardware store. I don't know what they're called. But you want something that holds itself together automatically or a springy handle, otherwise your hand will be tired of holding your tweezers shut forever. So I just hold that with, doesn't wiggle, and then we just start bouncing that. We're going to bounce that in the flame. We're going to turn this up a little bit for ease. Bounce, bounce, bounce. And so, the best part about working with free recycled glass is if it breaks on you, who cares? Pick it back up. You just broke it. Break it again. There's a glass artist and scientist, Jane Cook, and she has a saying that you have to break glass to make glass. Not like that. Every glass artist gets that immediately. We all break so much more glass than we make. And so, if you want to fuse this together, you're just going to get the end of this rod hot. You can see I've pulled so much cane with it, it's not straight anymore. That doesn't matter. And so you're just going to touch that to the corner. And I'm just going to slowly start heating the whole thing up. I didn't do a super great job of getting the adhesive off. See? It smashes. So you'll see it kind of burn off at moments. It'll mostly burn off to the point where you won't see it, but it does have the possibility to give you a little cloudiness in your material. So if you're someone who's really pristine in their work, you need to put in the elbow grease and get that off. If you're a little less finicky, it doesn't matter. So you can see just how temperature shocking this is, and that's because it is designed to heat up to molten liquid and then freeze in place. So you actually have to work pretty quickly with recycled glass. The pacing's just different than with Boro or with. You need the skills to get it soupy hot like a Boro user can, because soft glass folks have such a hard time getting recycled glass hot enough because in any other type of soft glass, you'd be burning the color out, you'd be boiling it, you'd be just trashing it. But you don't have to get it quite as hot as you would get boro. So boro workers are like, I can heat this, but you have to be gentle with it, like you would be with soft glass. You can't just like sink it into the flame and leave it there.
So you're basically saying it has the most annoying traits of both.
Of both.
Like it's stiff and
but if
shocky.
It's stiff and shocky.
And stops moving too quickly. And
but it makes you a really good glass worker because you get really fast, you get really precise. So for developing hand skill with a material that you're not worried that you just spent gob tons of money on, does it work for that? And as someone who always switched back and forth between boro and soft glass, it was so helpful because all my bad habits from both, like I would bounce my boro, which boro does not want to be bounced. You'll temperature confuse it and it'll be weird and shocky for you then. But then finally learning to superheat glass the way you need to for boro was really valuable. And also, when we rework recycled glass in the torch, the idea is not just that it's a free material. The idea is not just that it's more environmentally friendly. Every time we bring glass into a heating environment, we're spending energy. And a lot of people say, well, that has to be counterintuitive to being a conservationist, to being an environmentalist. No conservationist says you're not allowed to use any energy ever. The idea is to use our energy well and spend it where we like it best. And so I would like to spend my energy making glass, but if I can keep this glass out of the landfill where it will never dissolve or break down into anything, and landfills are a huge problem and wasting perfectly good ecosystems, that seems worthwhile to me. There's an incredible outfit in New Orleans that is actually taking bottle glass and turning it into sand. And they do a couple different things with it. One of the things they're doing is that they started off with right from the get-go, is they just had a single bottle crusher making sand, and they filled sandbags for flood prevention and control during natural disasters, and they gave them away for free. New Orleans doesn't have any glass recycling, so all of their glass was going to the landfill, and then making sure that people had access to sandbags was a huge problem. We have a sand shortage in the world, which seems ridiculous, but it's true. Like, there are sand mafias that steal leaches because we need it for stuff, especially for the making of concrete and cement. And so making our own sand out of glass is really valuable. And then after they had upscaled to a facility that was able to make more than just sandbags, they're now using their sand after a lot of scientific testing with the state Forest and Agriculture. They're using it for coastal restoration. So they're creating berms and dams and putting down sandbags in order to restore the coastline so that everywhere floods less collectively. And it's having massive success. And plants can grow in it. It's completely inert. It doesn't hurt the environment. And it's saving all of that. And it's all cold processed, so that's actually using hardly any energy, which is just fabulous. And so there's so many uses. And I mostly use the recyclability of the glass I use as a talking point in conservation entry in with my glass. So glass already is beautiful, and people want to look at it, they want to touch it, they want to handle it. People are in awe of glass no matter what. And so when we do that, we can start a conversation about something really uncomfortable. If I want to talk to you about microplastics and I know I'm going to be a buzzkill, I better have some pretty glass to back it up. And if I can say, well, this glass is recycled because it's so much better and can be, so much the better. All right, so now that I have both mandrels on this, you saw I just stuck the hot one to the other side. I'm just getting this as hot as possible. So when you take a strip and you're going to make cane, the biggest problem that you're going to have right now is that you're going to have bubbles. And so the best way I've found to get rid of the bubbles is to twist the glass as you heat it, and that's going to push the bubbles to the surface and they're all going to pop. So turning your hands opposite directions like you're twisting or pulling taffy. Not that many of us have made taffy, but it's a general, sugar analogies, food analogies work. So as you twist it, I can see it from my side because it's against the torch where that air is getting close to the surface. And so as I twist that, I can really start to see it pop those bubbles. And I don't mind the bubbles too much, but bubbles are more air surface, and so they'll cool your cane down faster, and so you'll end up with a thick spot in your cane if you have a bubble, because it won't move as fast as everything else.
You're using a pretty moderate flame if you're using it, if you work hotter.
You can work hotter. You can turn it
Not
up.
that I'm not efficient or anything.
Not that you work on a Carlisle. Giant torch. More hotter. We can turn it more hotter. So turning it more hotter works for green. Turning it hotter does not always work for blue. Blue is a more sensitive color, and especially, my European friends hate this, theirs has a sealant coating on it for some reason that is glass, it's not plastic, but it leaves this kind of like burn residual pullback. And so for that one, it sounds dumb. You have to heat it so gently, but you can get it just as hot. You just have to get there more slowly to let it all incorporate. And that's so infuriating because you're like, well, how hot can I get it? It's like you can get it all the way hot. You just have to take longer to get there. There's a glass artist I was talking to when I was first learning to blow glass in the hot shop. And he was talking about learning to turn something nicely while it was feeling too hot for you to control and it was getting out of control. And he's like, there's no way to describe it. Just turn sweet. And that's so irritating when you don't feel like you have that ability. But now I find myself, when this is happening, being like, well, just heat sweet. And you just have to find that like gentle introduction until you can have it all the way hot. So now I've got a few little left bubbles, but the biggest ones are gone.
Do you know what the COE of the average bottle glass is?
So the average COE of bottle glass, they've done a couple different tests on it, and it's somewhere in the 80s. But COE is really deceptive in that our art glass that we use is developed to have a range of malleability, where this is much closer to, not closer to, but more similar to a metal, where it's like I can be soup or I can be solid, is more what we want it to do with just that little bit of range, but still usable. Okay, now I have this just heated glob, and now we're just gonna pull cane. The slower you pull, the thicker it's gonna be, and once you see a little bit of color coming back in the mandrels, that means you have a diameter set and you can start to pull a little bit harder. And as you pull harder, you see that little steak belly. And if I stop turning, it would just droop. And so you could make really lovely shapes like that, but we're making usable cane right now. And so we just pull, pull, pull. And then once you have the diameter you want, you could keep pulling and make a thin section, but you can just hold it until it cools. You can see I didn't spend all my time getting my bubbles out, but that's okay. And then once you have your rod, you're just going to melt off one end. Drop that in the water. Or if you have it, you can have a dry jar, but it just has to have enough glass in the bottom not to temperature shock and break your jar. That jar is nice and empty and clean, so we won't do that. And then I cut it off the other end so I don't have it moving around. Drop that on the table to cool. And then I can heat up, oh thank you, just pouring. So, you saw that crack and I immediately looked in my lap. I always flame work on a wheelie chair because I work too fast and I often pop glass on myself, so a wheelie chair lets me stand up really fast. That way things fall off. But, so I don't need to clean off this end if I just want to pull one of the same color. But if I want to switch colors, I could do that. So I'm going to heat up a blue one this time, so I'm just going to dunk that real quick and switch mandrels.
So if you were using Boro as a mandrel, you do it basically the same way where you coat it or you try to seal to it?
So you can seal right to it. So we'll pull one blue, and then we'll make something on the Boro, so you can see that difference. Because you do just seal to it. The trick is you can't leave any with the other.
Right.
So they have a different enough working ability that you're able to really see what's what while you're working it. You can really make that change. And so if I'm working on something large, like I want to make a big rose or a big leaf or something like that, where working it with my other tools is going to be harder and not enough support, I'll use Boro rods instead of mandrels. And I can use it completely like a handle so long as I take all of the Boro off at the end. And if I do that, you can put it away.
So it's enough of a skill that you can let it get cold?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Not cold, but like workable cold. Yeah, it works great. I learned it from Amber Cowan, who said she learned it from Lauren Stump. And he was using Boro with soft glass to pull Marini because you needed your handle not to superheat and drop the glob of glass you were trying to get really hot. And so Amber Cowan doesn't use, she uses some bottle glass, not a ton, but she uses another type of reclaimed glass. And so she was looking for a handle that was going to work well for her. So that ended up being her solution after taking one of his classes. We're all just learning from each other to get where we need to go. So the more we ask each other questions, the faster we get to do stuff. All right, so I have it on one end, keeping it warm, and I just want to stick to the other end. Do. All right. First time I started trying to work with shards of glass, I tried to just hold a shard of glass and just wind it on the mandrel like it was cane. And it's so thin and shocky that was miserable. But I had to make that mistake before I was like, why am I reinventing the wheel here?
Do you always melt it into cane, or do you like make that into a leaf or something like that, you know?
Yeah, so I don't always melt a cane. If I'm not going to melt a cane, I don't usually melt on the mandrel, so I'll use the Boro instead because it's just more comfortable turning diameter. But yeah, I don't always melt a cane, and sometimes I've also learned to make shard beads, which is what I should have been doing when I was making myself miserable, pretending that these strips of glass were rods, and actually just using the shape of the shard to make a fun bead. And I have some examples in that box that we can pass around, and I'll make one to show you. Because a lot of people say, well, it's too shocky, you just can't do that. And don't ever let anybody tell you you can't. If people start telling you you can't, stop asking their opinion really fast. And just try it, because what's the harm? There's no harm in it. There's a gentleman I'm friends with who works in Indonesia. His name's Ivan. And he networks with bottle glass. He builds these incredible lacy structures out of this incredibly temperamental and shocking glass that I would have said, even though I had been using recycled glass for a long time, I would have said, oh, that's not one of the things recycled glass could do. And when I asked him how he knew he could do that, he said, oh, those were just the things I had seen. That was what I wanted to make. So that's what I made. It's like, yeah, that's the attitude. Just do it.
So can you fire, like if you get a really big cut on the bottom of your bottle, can you just fire polish the lip?
Yeah, you can fire polish the lip. I don't have a big enough space where I work to mostly fire polish them, so my goblets are not fire polished. You can do that. There is some unevenness in wall thickness that can occasionally give you a dip where it's a little thinner, heating it up. But I use hand polishing pads, and I put a podcast on, and I stand in the sink, and I hand lap them. Which is, I mean, it's the tools I had access to. And a lot of this was pandemic developed, so I wasn't going anywhere, and I had gobs of time. All right, so I've got this hot again. And I heated it just more slowly. There's not any smudge to be really seen on this shade of blue. Some lighter shades of blue that are not quite the sapphire of the sapphire gin bottles or the teal rather, are a little worse at it. This one wasn't so scummy. But if you do get scum on it, you can just tweeze that off. Get it hot, pick it off, and it'll be fine. This one has a little bit of texture, and if you over pull it while it's cooling, you'll frizzle the surface. I don't know why, it just does. So, melt that off at the end. again, the thicker you pull your canes, the longer they'll take to be cool to the touch. So welder's touch, always, because some colors take a little longer to cool down than others. So you'll be like, oh, that'll be fine. It won't. You want your fingers working, don't do that. Let me drink some water for one moment. All right, cooking show. We have cold rods of glass. Oh wait, we wanted to do the boro. So we've used mandrels now. Let's switch to the boro rods. So these are getting a little short, but they're just average boro rods. I'm just gonna start with one. I don't have to bounce the boro. Don't bounce the boro. But that's what I said about bad habits. Your bad habits need so much control. It makes you so aware of what you do with your hands at all times when you switch between different types of glass. Oh, and important, if you're starting with recycled glass, if you're learning to bounce it in the flame, always bounce it with an open hand and away from your face, because then it blows up away from you and your hand blocks your face if it blows back at you. I have one little burn right there from it rolled down my safety glasses and stuck to my face right there. It's not very visible, but it's very annoying. If I get any level of tan, you can see that little mark. That burn got much profanity. All right, so when I'm gonna do this, I make myself a little spot to do it. So I heat up the end and I just stamp it down on the graphite to give myself a little working buttress. And then we're gonna take our green and the tongs. I did this with tweezers for a long time before I had this. But when I picked it up at the tool thrift shop, I was like, oh my God, this is the thing. This is what I need. Basically, everything in this process that I'm showing you, I did less efficiently at the start. So even if you're like, well, I don't have that tool, neither did I at the beginning, you still can. And so I'm gonna get this just a little bit hot on the end. Stick it on. Excuse you, if I go too quick, grab that back. And then I'm just gonna crumple this up. If I wanted to pull cane or if I wanted to pull a shape out of it, I could attach the boro handle to the other side. But I think I'll just make a leaf shape out of this and we don't have to add a second handle unless I want to pull it that way. So because these strips are flat, which is a little inefficient, I often just twist them to start getting them more compact quickly, and then they're easier to sink heat into. And again, the green is working nicer than that blue because the blue was a beer bottle. I don't remember which beer it is that comes in a blue bottle. I found it along the side of the road. Someone pitched it out their window. Don't do that. It's not worth it. You don't know that someone's going to come pick it up and make a piece of art out of it, so don't do that. But the green is the Jameson bottle that I had, so that's churning really nicely. Swoosh. And again, it cracked a little bit there on the top because I was being overzealous with it. Doesn't matter. I will say, depending on what studio you work out of, people get a little futzy about having alcohol bottles around. My greatest recommendation is if you're going, because you shouldn't really mix alcohol and glass blowing, let's be honest. If you're going to be bringing them into somebody else's studio, delabel them all before you bring them, because it makes it look like material to start with rather than somebody drinking on the job. And like, leave them marked for art. Keep them in the back seat of your car. That was a problem once. They're like, how much have you had to drink tonight? None. I just have many empty bottles in the footwell of the passenger seat. Don't do that. Put them in the trunk. Carrying glass bottles around. Problems you don't think of till you have problems. Alright, so if I wanted to get a lot of bubbles out of this, I could attach a handle, do the twist, 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 but I don't really need to. I can just like press it against the graphite to like really make sure I'm compacting it. Really heat that up again. And you can see my handle is really disappearing into that. Doesn't matter. So as it heats up, the boro heats up more slowly than the recycled glass, so it gives you a really sturdy rest to rest upon. And then when you go to take it all out, you can almost see like the shadow of the boro in it. You can see a deviation in how the light refracts, and so you can make sure that you get it all out, because if you leave even a slight little blip of boro in there, it will blow up in the annealer, and that's just because when it cools down, it can't handle it. More questions, or I'll just ramble at you. Anything?
Yeah, you can ramble.
Okay, I'll just ramble at you. But this is
I'm fascinated by your goblets over there that have little coily bits. And little
we'll make the
bits on
coily
there.
bits.
And so the coily bit, I can comprehend how you get the bottle or cup hot enough to attach the coily bit without.
So I don't. I do those attachments cold. Because again, pandemic era, if you wanted to get it hot enough, if you wanted to be careful enough with it, you'd need a lathe to make those small bits, and you'd need to do it in the round. There is a gentleman, I can't remember his name. He is working with bottle glass on a lathe right now, and actually flaring out the feet of his bottle glass goblets and doing a very almost Venetian looking style of bottle goblets, which is lovely. But I had that moment of I was a hot shop, I was a flame worker, then I was mostly a hot shop person, and then I fell back in love with my torch, and I realized that I had this idea that everything had to be done hot, and it was this need, and I was like, but it can't be cold, and I was like, why?
So that's cold fusion.
So that's cold fusion. And so there are a couple different adhesives that you can use. Hextol being the one that works best, of course. It is the glass adhesive. But it also it goes bad after a year, and I travel too much to ever keep it good enough. And I mean, it goes bad as in you can't mix the parts anymore. It lasts forever and is stronger than your glass if you actually use it as you should as your epoxy. I use bathtub silicone. It's extremely durable. It can get wet. I've had a cup that has a silly silicone bird on the side since college for over 10 years. It has gone in the dishwasher. It doesn't come off.
Bathtub silicone.
Bathtub clear silicone. And except for when I work with black glass, because the clear looks gloopy, and so instead I get black bathtub silicone. Works great. So long as you let it set and you don't bump it or try and twist it or torque it or test it for 48 hours after you've applied it, it is the strongest stuff ever. You just have to have 2 clean surfaces. A little bit of texture is nice, but it doesn't need it. All right, we have a hot glob of glass, so let's make a leaf out of it.
Yes.
I only have a certain series of tools I've taken out for this, so we're going to make a really basic leaf because I set myself up like that. I have mashers. These came in my original blow glass with a MAP gas torch in your house with no ventilation instructions kit that I can't believe they sell to beginners, my gosh. But they are welded steel plates on a pair of pliers with a spring. It is hysterical to me. Somebody made these in their garage, I'm sure of it. All right, mash. Trying to mash just beneath my boro. And you can see that my boro barely, and I can give it a little pull so I can really see where that boro is. Put that back on my paper. John, can I have a slightly larger pair of tweezers? Thank you so much, sorry. Either way. Whatever you find. Thank you kindly. So I can see that I have this weird little tag of boro down close to the bottom there. So I'm going to be really careful not to continue to heat that spot and pull that into the rest of it, because I'll have to waste a little bit up there because I got that boro so low. All right, getting hot. Hot, hot, hot. And then whenever you pull these big moves to make the basic shape of something, You can always go back in for detail work, but your big moves always look the best and most graceful if you do them all at once. They just do. So we get, it's kind of shaped like a tongue now. Grab the tip. There we go. And I like a really pointy leaf, so we're just going to take the end of that off. You can just melt that back down into something, but we'll make Frit today. And now leaves are never straight, so you have to swing it a little bit. So if you're really good and you've worked with your, I pulled that a little too cold right at the end to get that taut, and I got a little crizzling effect, you can go and melt that back in a little bit. If you're really fast at making loops, when you take this off the other side, you could make a loop out of the recycled glass itself. You just have to do it quickly enough that your cold tool isn't overcooling the end of it. And I'm out of practice at that, so we won't be doing that. But I could go back in and I could just like fill the edges a little bit if I wanted. But now I just want to show you taking off the boro. So I'm just going to heat it up a bunch back there. Can you see that weird little tag of boro I got up there? Yeah, that's from when I dropped the piece when I first attached it. So I'm going to make really, really sure I don't get that in the piece. Push that back a little bit. Out of the way. You can heat your tweezers just gently, gently, to make sure as you're pulling it on the other side. I did give myself a little temperature shock there. Melt that back out. Yeah, because I touched it with the tweezers without heating them. Because I was focused on that boro. For my last slide where I wanted those arrows in glass, I just heated it up in the middle and then went whoop, twisted leaf. You can kind of twist it off at the end. Give yourself a fun little whoopsie-daisy. And then you have a leaf. You don't have to keep that, so we'll just leave it there so you can look at it. And then just like you would clean up the end of a boro rod you were working with as a punty, just ready to go again. And so you can use it down until you have no more boro, add it to the others, all good to go. And so I've built roses that way. I've built really large leaves, complex things. But one of the big things is if you work really thin, you can network like Yvonne does. And if you are going to work with more pieces, you have to either keep the whole thing very, very warm on the cusp of moving, or you have to move forward and never flash back. Because if you reintroduce any of that heat, you'll crack it. But if you just work away, it'll be structurally sound as you build out and away. So like build a big base and then pull it out is fine. But if you go and be like, oh, I should reheat the base of that, and you put it back in, it'll go poof. And it'll remind you that it doesn't prefer that. All right, so now I want to show you some other things that we can do. Once you have your down to rods, so if you're not building big off of boro punties, if you're going to build off of rods, I do a lot of that, but I also do build small freehand sometimes. And the way that I do that is you can either build straight off of the rod itself and like build a small little leaf on the end of this, and then because I do so much cold assembly, I often incorporate wire. And when I incorporate wire, you can use copper, which is the perfect glass compatibility nonsense, or you can buy much cheaper stainless steel. And the thinner the diameter, the less likely it is to break your glass because it'll heat up and go ugh. But the thinner it is, the more you introduce it in a flame, it'll ball up and run back at your fingers. Beware. So I brought show and tell stuff. So let's start with wire because I think that's more fun than mandrels. Actually, it's all fun. What am I saying? This is all stuff I have built on wires. Have some glass. And so a mix of botanical leaves, blueberries. I had a little flower press on a pair of pliers I bought online that I was trying to see if I could like mass produce flowers. I can, but the learning curve was steep. It was like reworking it again because getting it in the press on the wire was tricky. So to build on wires, you have to be able to hold the wire not in your fingers because your fingers will get too hot. I tried to hold the wire in my fingers. I couldn't understand how people incorporated wire until I realized they weren't holding it in their fingers. So the first way I do it is with a pair of forceps. This is how I learned, is with this. And I would hold the wire in the forceps. I would take my rod of glass and I'd bounce the glass. And whenever a rod gets too short to use, I just stick it to the end of another nice long one. I don't ever put shorts to shorts because that's way more effort than it needs to be. I just attach a short to another long one. That's way easier. So I heat up the end of this. And as soon as it's glowing, you don't have to bounce it. Especially probably don't bounce it or it'll just crack further up and jump the whole hot piece away from you, which is not what you're going for. So I don't have to pinch the forceps closed. It's just holding that piece of wire, piece of stainless steel wire, easy. At some point, that green leaf I put on the graphite is going to pop and it's going to surprise us all.
What do you use for an annealing temperature?
I use a soft glass program just because it's gentler. I think you could get away with something more aggressive, but it was a program already in my annealer, and it's less shocking than a boro schedule, and so that's what I've gone with. So I'm holding my wire just beneath my flames, but I don't melt off the wire as best I can, and then I'm just winding on a big glob of green. And then once that's on there, just going to pull away, not heating it too much because I don't want to collapse that wire. Some people add their wire at the end. I don't know if I'm not dexterous enough for that, if I haven't practiced that enough. That bothers me. So I don't. I add it at the beginning. And then I just heat that up, making sure I'm mostly heating the glass, not the wire. And then mash it flat. And you get your base leaf shape. And you can really dicker about the shape before you mash it. If it's really round, you get a really broad leaf that you can pull to a point. I'll elongate them, let them droop really far if I'm going to pull them into grass-like botanicals. There was a point at which I could make really scientifically specific leaves because I was practicing. I was making over 100 of these every day for a while. Pandemic, we had so much time. And so grabbing the end and giving it a pull. And if you want a line in it, like a center line, once you have your leaf like this, it would be really hard to go back and add that indentation. The best thing to do there is take a pair of straight shears and actually cut a line in before you mash it. It leaves you with a memory of that line in the middle before you pull it long, and then it's there. I didn't bring my scissors, but that's how you would do that.
Want some?
Sure, I would use some scissors. Here, we'll put this in the annealer. And so this is the only moment you need to be ready to open those forceps. Putting it in here. Just drop it in there. It's good to go. And so if you use a lot of steel wire and you put it in your annealer, thank you so much, Chris. If you use a lot of steel wire in your annealer, it will, the outside of the steel carbonizes in the heat and it'll be black. You can take a little bit of really fine sandpaper and just give it a whoosh, and it comes right off the steel, which is really nice. And then, or you can leave it black. It's like a patina in and of itself, but it will leave a little smuts in your annealer if you really stack it up, if you're making many, many, many a day. I take a little vacuum and it's like a keyboard vacuum, and I pull all that up. I just put a ceramic brick down in there so that it's not in the soft part of the bottom of my annealer. So after I had spent many, many, many months working with forceps and having a hard time rotating them in the round, I bought this. This is the Carladona pin vise. So if you get a pin vise on the internet that is not a glass pin vise, it has a little screw mechanism, like a power drill to really chuck down your wire, and that gets hot, which means you can't then undo it to take out your wire. So Carladona, being the angel that he is, made this pin vise for flame workers that is barrel loading. So it is a thumb up to tighten and a thumb down to release. And it pushes this pin down against your wire to hold it in place, and then it does not wiggle. They have been out of stock online for I don't know how long, until I went to the Detroit Gas Conference and they had 2 of them at a table that was selling Carladona tools, and I have never purchased a thing so fast. I had seen Amber Cowan's, I knew what I wanted, and then it took me forever to find one, and now I have one. So thank you to whoever, I can't remember which tool provider it is that imports his things, but it's very helpful. Gas conferences are great for that. All right, so let's build another leaf, but let's do it with a pin vise this time because I can turn it in the round. And I've made water droplet shapes. I've done a tiny bit of networking just to see if I can get anywhere close to Yvonne, and I cannot. It's not something I have practiced enough. And the amazing thing is when you develop a technique like that, because you will have immediately been doing it longer than everyone else, no one's ever going to catch you. So long as you keep practicing, no one's going to get there. So you will have developed so much further than them. Even if someone tries to copy you directly, they can't. It's great. I heard Raven Sky River say that once, where he makes those very realistic, amazing animals out of glass. And I think it was on the Talking At Your Glass podcast. He was asked, well, aren't you concerned that so many other people are making very realistic animals now? And he said, no, I've been doing it so much longer. If I stop innovating, they might catch up, but I don't intend to do that. So no one's ever going to catch up. I was like, that's the attitude. All right, so we're winding on a little bit of glass. And so sometimes I like the organic shape of winding on the glass, and I've left it like that too, like a little fiddlehead fern sort of situation.
Can this glass handle cold sills like that?
It can, yep. If you did like a polka dot that had a really severe undercut, it wouldn't like that, but this where it's kind of hot to hot but has that ridge, it doesn't matter at all.
Have you ever gotten it to slump in the kiln? Like if you put one of those curved shards in, have you ever gotten it hot enough that it's straightened on its own?
You have to get it a lot hotter than you think you do. So there are some people that fuse with recycled glass and some people that have tried casting with recycled glass. And it needs to get hotter for longer than you think in order to do it. So one of the things I've been wanting to practice is I want to take cylinders, like the bottles I've hot popped, run the score in it, and take out a sliver like I'm flattening a cylinder, like if you wanted sheet glass out of what you blew in the hot shot, which is a process that's practiced. But I haven't seen anyone do it with recycled glass. And so I would estimate that I need to get my kiln, my fusing kiln, up to a temperature of about at least 1500, if not 1800, in order to get it to start slumping. And I think I'll still have some wobble to it. I don't think it'll ever be really nice and flat without fusing to the plate. From what I've seen, and I've seen people like stack in these little slivers of glass into molds and fuse them, and you can still see the shadows of them together. If you have even a little bit of dust, it won't burn out, it'll just encapsulate it forever. And even with frit, you end up with a really granulated casting texture with that. So you can get it to, but it doesn't want to. Make a little more ginkgo leaf shape. That's the benefit of being a naturalist making leaves, is that it doesn't matter what shape it is, you'll know what shape it is. Because it could just be a whimsical leaf, but why, when it could be a scientifically accurate one? The only plant things I do really whimsically, I'm going to extend it a little past ginkgo, let's add some frills to these edges. So you can go back and work the edges if you want by just heating up one side, but once you have it paddle and you don't want it to round out and slump, you got to be a little careful. But you can just really heat up the one side and pinch, 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 pinch. More like a beach leaf now. What was I saying? The thought is gone.
When you're heating it up and you're trying to pinch up the thing, you can't get it too hot.
Oh yeah, you can't get it too hot or it'll ball up, or you'll overheat your wire without thinking about it because the glass is holding so much residual heat, and that will kink over on you, and that's very annoying. But again, it makes you work really fast because that was all the working that had it. Even if I needed 2 more pinches, I probably would have run out of heat. But so you can just make lots of leaves. You can make all different, like you can get very large. And if you find yourself heating up your wire too often, you need to increase the thickness of your wire. Is just what you have to do. So I have a couple different gauges. I'm super dyslexic, so every time I order wire and gauges, I order like 6 different sizes because I have to be able to see them physically to remember what size wire that gauge is going to be. I just like having all of them. And then I go through one of them. Probably those things I handed out. You can see some of them are really thick wire and some of them are really thin wire, depending on the application. All right. Put this leaf away. So the color we're saying that we love is a specific color, and when you start looking at recycled glass art, it is the color you will see most often because it is so beautiful. In terms of like the recycled glass rainbow, as I've heard it referred to by the folks at Remark Glass, your colors are a little limited with recycled glass. So the nicest ones end up getting used the most, which is why you end up with things like, this is sapphire gin. If one of us could get a sponsor working with recycled glass, that would be really helpful, but also none of us need to drink that much gin. But this is the nicest. When you find blue that is not this shade of blue and it's a different bottle, I had a bottle that was slightly darker than this, but like really aquamarine, that was nothing like the cobalt blue of other bottles you see, and I was so excited about it. I was amazed, and then I was taking the label off it, and I carved through the plastic coating that was making it that color. Oh, disappointment. So disappointed. And so you can do a burn test. You can just hold a lighter to a thick part of your bottle and see if that plastic coating burns off. If you think you have a red bottle, like a cheap one, it's not red. It's plastic coated. If you have a really unique blue, it's plastic coated. If you think you have an opaque teal, it's plastic coated. So many of them, because it's cheaper for them. Tell them we don't like that. Tell them we want real colored glass. So a lot of times when you thicken glass too much, you can lose some of the depth and color. So one of the things I like doing best is making shapes and textures in the beads that really show off those qualities. And so one of them is the spirals, which gives you all that play and light from thick to thin. That was not far enough. That was almost far enough. That thick to thin spiral is really great practice for your control. When you just make a regular bead, it doesn't have much depth, it is just bead. You can layer the colors of glass to make it have a little bit more, which is like my necklace. And then the other thing I like to do are hollow beads, which catch a lot of light and can have a little bit of irregularity in them, which helps them really show off their true colors. So if you're going to make hollow beads, you have to start with the spirals. And a lot of people melt in their spirals as they go. I don't, because that seems like more effort. But also, it's really good at learning the temperamentality of your glass. Let's use a different color for the sake of it. Let's use a lighter green than what we've been using. So if you've made beads ever, I know some people are like, get your sticks away from my glass. I don't want any metal in my glass working. But mandrels have been used since the dawn of glass. Basically, as soon as we moved away from amulets and small pieces of glass, mandrels have been used. They are the OG creation of glass anything, from beads, which were so significant in so many different cultures, to the first core-formed vessels. So we were told originally that core-formed vessels were these amalgamations of clay, straw, dung, dirt, and that they were dipped in pools of glass and brought up. And the science doesn't really support that anymore. One, glass was such a rare commodity that having a liquid pool of it was almost inconceivable. And so instead, what we are starting to develop the idea of and having is that they had powdered glass, and that they were heating up the core on some kind of mandrel, even if the mandrel wasn't metal yet. It was probably a ceramic mandrel. And then rolling the hot core in powdered glass in layers to build up the thickness of the walls of the core-formed vessels. And the reason for so long we thought that it was done by dipping those core forms is because we came to it from an extremely hot shop centrist viewpoint. Because sometimes flame working gets a bad rap. It shouldn't. I feel like that feeling is tipping back the other direction right now, but there was definitely a time when I was in college when it was like, oh, those flame workers, they're like, it doesn't have the same zhuzh as the hot shop, and they're just different art materials. That would be saying like oil paints are better than watercolors. They're both paint. They're just very different. Everybody chill. You could do both. It's fine. So for learning to use this glass, you saw that I bounced it. I have the center of my bead release heated up. And then for this, I have a small gather of glass. It gathers really nicely compared to soft glass because it's that little bit stiffer. But you want to make sure you get hot enough because you will grab and pull your bead release off because it is a little more tacky than you're expecting for soft glass for people who have used a lot of bead making. So you're just going to tack that very center and then just draw away. And then you're just going to keep heating that reservoir as you roll. The more evenly you roll, the more even your disc. It's not a super even disc, but that doesn't matter. It's organic. And then you can do these sorts of cold seals. If you are not careful enough about keeping your whole spiral warm, it will crack along whichever cold seal has had the least attention from the flame down below, and you'll end up with these little windows in your spirals. If you can do your whole spiral with one gather of glass against your rod, so much the better. I'm not usually that precise. And they say if you can make it look easy, you're good at it. That was a 2-wrap spiral. That wasn't so bad. But the more of these you make, the more even they become, the more perfectly round they become. If you're trying to add glass, always start where it's highest, which feels counterintuitive, but that will be the thin connection point, and you'll lay the meat of what you're laying down further from that spot. So you always start where it's high and go low. If you try and put stuff in the low spot, you'll just build your high spot again and again. And so we'll leave that spiral as is, and then we'll make a hollow bead because they're fun. That was a decision. We'll fix that in a minute. We're not concerned about it. It's fine. It's not about the end product. It's about the process today. So now we're going to go to the hollow beads. Haha, that was a better throw. Hollow beads are just 2 discs side by each and touch together. And when you look in the how to make glass bead books, which are so wonderful and helpful, and kudos to the people that could record their process well enough to show us in book form. We'll use our most favoriteest color, the blue. Ooh, actually, let's use the dark blue because it shows up better when it glows, so you can see where I'm keeping my heat. So, excuse me, they make their spirals, their discs side by side, so perfectly elegant and even, and they touch them, like they build them out into little cups that touch. And when I was learning to blow glass, the thing I wanted, or the flame work rather, the thing I wanted to make more than anything else was a hollow fish. I can't tell you why. That's what I wanted to make. And to do that, I had to make a hollow bead. And I was not patient enough making the hollow bead because I wanted to add fins to it. But I wasn't willing to wait to make perfect hollow beads. And what I learned was, you don't have to. When you trap air inside your hollow bead, because it is sealed in there against the mandrel, when that happens, the air that you've trapped heats up and it expands and it inflates your hollow bead round, whether or not your stuff was perfect. So long as you were pretty close, it works out great. Which is so funny. When I've shown this to other folks that make hollow beads, they are flummoxed that I get even-walled, nice-looking hollow beads. The recycled glass gives me a little bit more wonk, which I actually like for how it throws light. But they've always spent so much time getting these perfect cups that it just isn't something I knew to do or cared to do, and so I learned you can get away without it. So touch down and roll up the disc. And so the trick to making two discs side by side is, again, heat control and really sharing that heat. Excuse me. So, that was not even heat control. Put that down. But I wasn't done with you, so come back. Again, now that's something you might do with glass you bought, but when you drop a chunk of recycled glass, pick it back up. It's already hotter than the rest of it. It heats up so much faster. It's so nice. So I'm just keeping this in the back of the flame, keeping it generally warm. And I'm going to make a disc about this size first, and then I'm going to make its pair next to it. I have seen people who make one disc and then the other. I don't know how to keep the first disc warm. I've got to go back and forth. Maybe it's more focus, maybe it's more control. I don't know. But then touch down, turn around. The real sticklers are just really mad about how lumpy this is, but it doesn't matter. So 2 discs, side by each.
No air source.
No air source. You can get hollow mandrels that have a little pinhole that you poke through the bead release, and you can inflate your hollow beads then and make them even thinner walled, but no air source. I have had a little too much coffee today, apparently, because my hands are just a little bit shaky.
This is cool too.
Round and round. So now I'm just like building up one wrap at a time to keep that heat even between the two. If I tried to gather too much glass and wrap around twice, I might neglect the other ring and crack it. And even when I do that, sometimes I'm able, it's not about what you can make, it's about what you can save. And I'm able to just add glass where it's popped off and keep going. We're in a building phase if you folks have questions.
So now are you starting to coil over towards the other side? Or?
I can. I prefer to go straight up and down coils. I find that with how quickly this moves when you do get it really, really hot, if you have it bent over, it tends to fold over. And so I prefer to go straight up and down with my coils and then manually bend them over to touch them together.
This is so stressful for me.
Cold seals?
No, not that. The lack of air.
Oh, the lack of
It's
air.
magically gonna fill it.
It's going to puff up, I promise.
Okay.
How about after this, we mix some of the colors to show how we can do that? Because they told me I couldn't do that, and we'll make a fish. Which is actually why I spent an extra 5 minutes at home looking for that black rod. I was like, it has to have eyes. So, depending on how far apart you've put your discs is how tall you have to go. If you were building them towards each other, it needs to be able to puff up round without touching the bead release in the center. And so, to do that, I just kind of generally know from lots of experience how tall I need to make it. Sometimes I don't do it right, and I end up with a really squat, awkward shaped bead. And so you always want to go for like 1 or 2 more wraps than you think you need. This is getting a little short and hot to use now, but we're going to make it. Glass blower hands, it's fine.
Have you ever tried to like melt 2 colors together to make a new color, or add elements to colors to make different colors?
I haven't tried adding any elements, and I haven't tried swirling them together enough to get a full new color. I find glass doesn't like to do that. It's not going to mix as easily as paint as we find like making marbled colors in the hot shop. And so you end up, one, adding a lot of stress to it to do that, to bend it over like that. This is the tool I want. And it doesn't prefer it, and you can end up with some things. I found more encasing the different colors to give you that depth of color has been really positive. Whether that's a really light green over a really dark green is kind of the closest you can get to making a new color, but not swirling them together so much as layering them. All right, so I'm getting one ring particularly hot without cooling the other one too much. You can see that glow really start to come back. And you just push, push, push. Messy, 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 like a clamshell. That ticks off a lot of perfectionists.
Yeah. I'm not a perfectionist, but it's bugging me.
All right, so the next important thing is as I'm heating this next disc, I'm looking for whichever part of this one I pushed over the furthest, and I'm gonna heat that spot more and tip it down to touch as soon as I can. That way I have like that connection point, so I know it's not gonna get away from me. Because sometimes the whole thing, if you heat it too close to the mandrel, will wanna like wiggle wobble. Technical term. Okay, so now I've got them kissing there, and I can spend some more time knowing that it's not gonna suddenly just pivot completely without touching the edges down together. And then just work around, touch, touch, touch. And now I'm mostly just heating the inside of it rather than the top, because the outside gives me a little bit of structural stability, but that's gonna get hot enough to bend it down to push. And I'm just like making sure that I seal off all those holes. I've left a little gap there. We're gonna say on purpose to show you what happens if you get a little gap there. So I can push.
So this is just kind of like knitting a hole that grew out the
Yeah.
sculptures.
And sometimes when there are bubbles in your cane that you've pulled, which there would never be in, hopefully never be, in glass that you bought for use, I just saw one pop that left a hole in the side of my bead. And so just like I left a hole in the seam, I'll show you what to do about that. So now I have it mostly sealed. It looks dreadful. It looks higgledy-piggledy. It looks organic. We're going to use a longer thing of glue because that one's too hot to use. And we're going to heat it up now, and you can see where the holes are because they don't heat up and churn and glow blue. So you can really see, like, if I heat that spot, I've got a hole there. It's not heating at all. And so I'm just going to heat up the end of this rod, and I'm just going to hatch it. Blob. And so just because this one buckled in there and didn't quite seal down there either, I'm also just going to patch that hole. I can push that together. I don't have to seal that one. All right, and then as I heat this up slowly to do the magic puff up moment, I'm making sure I don't have any holes in my cold seal wraps by kind of going around, or any bubbles that pop in. Just left me another hole, seal that up. If there's any holes in it, when you go to melt it flat, instead of puffing up as the air that's trapped expands, it deflates and all sticks to the mandrel, and then you just have a lumpy solid bead, which you can do stuff with. Nobody else will know, but you'll know. And again, still keeping the heat even on both sides mostly. So you have to heat it up evenly at this stage. It will be magic. It will puff up round. It will be lovely. Unless you let one side get too hot and bend in and touch the bead release. If it goes in there and tacks in, it's stuck there and it's not going to puff back up off the mandrel. So you got to keep it churning evenly enough that it doesn't flop down and touch. You can get it really soupy without it touching so long as you're churning it. But it can also get away from you. It's where it was really dipped in, evening out on the surface. So it was just a dent that's now puffing out. See how it's coming around? I can see where it's not rounding up is somewhere I haven't given it enough heat. So we'll just get that nice and hot. Make sure it all puffs up together. You can see my coffee shake. Depending on which hand you're more coordinated with, you can switch back and forth. I taught myself in my parents' basement when I learned to flame work with a couple of books that I realized years later I should have read the directions on rather than just looking at the pictures. And I got to school and learned some glass from one of the grad students, some flame working. And she said, "Oh, I didn't know you were left-handed." I'm not. But apparently I flame work for soft glass almost entirely left-handed because I didn't know any better to switch back and forth to my coordinated hand. So I made my other hand more coordinated. So if you end up with weird ridges and lumps, you can just take a mandrel and even that out. Or a marver, not a mandrel. Words. This is a pretty big bead because I wanted you to be able to see it really well. I don't usually go quite this large. Slightly smaller than this is a little easier to puff up, just because you can get the whole thing a little hotter a little more easily. Yeah. I mean, I could keep rounding this out until it was perfect, but that demo gets really boring. You just keep turning it until it's round and round and round. But yeah, hollow bead. Nice dark blue one, so it'll catch light nicely. Thank you. And when you have recycled glass that is on a mandrel, you're going to put in the annealer, you want to let it get a little colder than you would a regular soft glass bead that you're going to put in there, just because it's holding a little more residual heat, but it's showing you its color a little bit more quickly, if that makes sense. So you think it's cold enough to go away until you bring it to the annealer and you open up the annealer and it glows as you put it in there, and then you go, "Oh no, don't stick to stuff." So let it get a little bit cooler, it'll be good to go. Yeah. Put that away. Get back in there. Tweezers. Don't mind me. We're gonna. We don't care about that. Disc. All right. Let's make. Shall we make a fish? It's one of my favorite things to make. So, when I was 16 in my parents' basement, I had had one flame working lesson, which was one of those learn to make a bead classes where my instructor demoed a bead and then I made that same bead. And right before she put it away in the annealer, she would kind of help perfect it a little bit so you didn't see the organicness of what you had been doing, which was a little frustrating. But she made a bead, I made a bead, she made a bead, I made a bead, she made a bead, I made a bead. I had 3 beads that I'd made, a round one, a flattened one, and a barrel. And then the last thing she demoed that I didn't get to try was making a fish. Her fish was solid, it had a little bit of a pattern to the surface, and the fins were really, really small. And then I saw a glass artist in a book. Her name was Celia, and she made the most extravagant, beautiful, ridiculous fish with eyebrows and extra fins and dichroic glass, and they were just fabulous. And I thought, oh my gosh, I need to make fish. And I have not managed to find her. If you know Celia in person, if you are finding the internet people, tell her I'd like to thank her, because I have made, I don't know how many, probably at least 1,000 fish now in my career as a glass artist. So many fish. And that's why I learned to make hollow beads. And then I too made them with more and more complexity. And so that's kind of what we're going to do. So we have a limited range of colors. When I work with regular soft glass, I can make them as fanciful as I like with as many colors as I like, and I have, which is so much fun. But they're the only thing I don't make scientifically accurate when I'm making creatures. Often when I make leaves and botanicals and flowers and blueberries and all these things, I feel this like need from my naturalist background to make it recognizable. And I don't have the feeling with the fish. I can't explain it. But also, I've seen enough weirdness in the ocean to be sure that just because I've made a fish that I can't recognize an ID book does not mean it does not exist. Because the ocean has tried everything. Frogfish that are fish with feet and extra fins, and fish that don't have fins, which are eels, and all matter of variation. So you can make a fish look like whatever you want. It's still a fish, in my opinion. So I'm starting off with that really nice teal blue, and there's some kind of smut. Oh, I know what's on the surface. Should I own up to that? It's not the ceramic stuff in it. I have a big slab of ceramic stone next to my torch at home. And when I pull my canes, I pull them really long. I get a lot of shards together. I build it up all at once, and I pull them really long, and I set it down on that. And I forgot to make sure I had nothing on that. And I had just bought a bunch of new bead findings that had come in plastic, and there were little slivers of plastic on the stone. So when I set the hot rod down, immediately they were gone, but they were adhered to the surface of the rod. They'll mostly burn out as I work. I can see them leaving. But man, does that smell bad. That's why there's smuts in this rod. Even just dust, if your dust is thick enough, if you haven't worked at your station long enough, or you haven't kept it clean enough, will add smuts to your glass. We're in building stage again if anyone has questions. Have the internet folks had anything to say for themselves?
No, but we have 11 people that have been consistently watching.
Hi, 11 people. You're allowed to ask questions in there. Dom will be your voice on this end if you like. But also, feel free to just watch the hypnotic fire. It's like watching a productive campfire.
So you really don't do a lot, like you don't leave folios and do add things later, like connections later, particularly.
Not too thick, you don't. You could do the thin networking like Yvonne does and do avolios, and so long as you were building away, you could get away with that. Like this piece still hasn't blown up in our face because we haven't flashed it or gotten any hot near it again.
Right.
So there is still a lot more you could get away with. You just have to have a vision of what you want in mind and then start building that. You wouldn't want to just take something you were making in either soft glass or Boro directly to this until you had some proficiency with it. Like I definitely didn't try and make fish out of recycled glass until I had a lot of practice with them, or else the fins would have just blown up everywhere. But it is possible. So when I get to fins, you'll see me add more mass, kind of in an uneven, what seems to be almost a more cold connection kind of way, and that might answer some more of those questions.
And do you have any hints for how you can fire polish the end of a freshly cut fire?
Yeah, if you're going to fire polish the end of a bottle, you need a turntable and you need a pretty shallow, bushy flame. So, and you need a turntable where you can like either have plasticine that is holding your bottle in the center so it's held there, or that has the little runners like ceramicists use to make sure that the piece can't go away while they're trimming the foot. And that's important because once you're pushing on it with the flame, you could push it off center, and the faster it's spinning, it goes wong and away. So a short, shallow flame, and you want to keep it just at that top edge, and it'll round out nicely. But you want to look at the bottle when you choose it, and it wouldn't be right to flame polish all of them because you will, unless you don't mind that the lid be perfectly, or the lip be perfectly level. One more wrap. And there's a reason for that. So in this Jameson bottle, I can see a perfect example of why. We're gonna wrap. One more.
So
That's
you
nice.
spin it pretty fast when you're doing that?
you spin it consistently. It doesn't have to be super fast, but just moving all the time because you don't want to overheat one section.
And are you going to gently across them?
Yeah, so just pretty level, pretty flat. You don't want it tipped down because it'll curl down, so even a little up is a little better, so that you don't get your flame wrapped around the center. Ooh, that was the thing I was going to show you. That is important when we talk about bottles. After we make this fish, remind me that I need to use the neck of a bottle and show you something. Somebody be the brain. All right, we're going to push these discs together to make our hollow bead. But so, well, it's not a great example. And one of these will look, and sometimes you have a thickness in a wall. If their machine in the factory is not perfectly aligned, which they sometimes are and sometimes aren't, you'll have a thin wall of the bottle and a thick wall of the bottle. And if you flame polish that, the thick will bead up differently to a rounded edge than the thin will. And when that happens, you will end up with a dip in your lip, so it won't be flat across the top anymore. Actually, my cane cup shows that pretty well, where the thin and the blue and the clear didn't quite line up. Hey, get back there. Ooh. All right, kiss those together. You can actually see that this is quite a bit softer than the dark blue was. That's another thing. When you're in the furnace room or in the hot shop, working out of the furnace, black is the softest and white is the stiffest. And then when you work with soft glass on the torch, white is the softest and black is the stiffest. And then you work with recycled glass and it does whatever it wants. So you just have to practice with your bottle. When I first started working with recycled glass, I kept my glass very separated. This bottle was over here and that bottle was over there. I used old to-go containers to like keep shards and strips of glass separated because I thought I couldn't mix them at all. Any of the colors or even the same color but different bottle batches I thought would be a problem. Baloney. Not a problem. And so now the only thing I keep separate is my recycled glass, my soft glass, and my Boro, just to make sure I don't pick up one. Because there is soft glass that is like the same color as bottle glass, the Kelly green, which is the same as like a Heineken or a Jameson bottle. And that's really annoying when you do that. Because then you're like, I have all these beautiful things I made, and they're all pieces of the annealer. All right, so we are sealed, I believe. We're gonna make sure we don't have any holes. This was a less bubbly rod, so it has less holes to begin with, and I did a better job of kissing them together. If you have it wonged off really hard to one side, you can center it back a little bit, pushing on it before you start to heat it up, so like if you have a really high side, just so that it heats up a little bit more evenly. But you can just leave it as organic and ridiculous as you want. Heat it slowly, gently, keep it turning, and it'll puff up.
Kind of approaching one side first and then the other.
Yeah, just to make sure that heat's really even, so I can see where that heat is building, and also keeping control. Like if I can feel that one side is starting to slump towards the bead release, I'll switch which side I'm working on. So like this side I can see wasn't moving and rounding out at all, so I have to come back over here. This side looks really nice, so I can leave that and it's then an anchor for everything else to move around. And then with fish, it matters even less if your hollow bead is nice and round and organic, because once you get it all lovely and perfect and good, you're going to take it and you're going to squish it. And you're not pushing so hard that you touch it down to the bead release, just down enough that you get an oblong shape. And then the way to get the point of the face and the point of the tail bothered me for a long time. I couldn't figure out, I didn't want tweezer marks, I didn't want it pinched together that hard. Ooh, that smut's left me a weird haze in the middle. Not going to worry about it. And then I figured out momentum and gravity. Let it do it for you. So I'm just heating up one side, getting it pretty hot, and then once you have it pretty even, pretty hot, you just spin it fast between your hands. Pointy fish butt.
Nice. That's cool.
And so you can make any shape of fish once you start doing this. You can have it really pointed on both sides. One of my more favorite fish shapes at the moment is a pretty pointy tail and a slightly squared off blunter looking face. So I'll sometimes just heat really like right where the lips will go, and then I'll just give it a little something, but not as far. And then heat up the forehead area and just a little, boop, little flatten, just to give it that kind of shape, a little chin bump, and then you have your base fish shape. And now you've got to start building fins. So to build fins, we're going to use a couple different colors just to show you that you can. But also that means you have to be more diligent with your heat. Oh, we have to build, oh, eyes are last because we don't have any white. Okay. Thinking back through my process. So you have to be more diligent with your heat control because they are going to maybe expand and contract a little bit more differently, but not so much so. So we're going to use 3 colors in our fins. We're going to go from dark blue against light blue base with this kind of smoky haze of the plastic I burnt while I pulled this, to a darker green to a light green kind of frilly end of the fins. Oh, first, do I have the right tool? Yes, I can use that tool. First, we're going to do the lips. It took me years to figure out that lips have to be done first because you have to get them really hot to get a nice shape. And if you do them last, you melt out the shape of the face too hard. So you get a blob of color, the color you want the lips. You heat up the face just slightly, blob it on, pull it up, wind up as much as you want. You can make big lips, little lips, it's your fish. And then you heat up just that, not the face. And you're just making it like a little gather of glass, plump, plump. And then you're just going to take a flat, straight tool and push down in the center, rock it back and forth, and you've got kissy lips. I have a really flat end tool at home I didn't bring that I often use for that. I've also used the straight razor on a stick to do really crisp, really flat fin or lips before. So when I build fins, I do them in a very specific order. I don't know if that's because that's the order they need to be done in after years of practice now, or if it's just the rhythm I've gotten into to remember to put on all the fins. But I go side fin, side fin. There are types of tweezers that pull into like interior points, and you can use those for matching up your fins or eyes side to side if you're feeling like one fin is much further forward or back than the other when you start doing this. But it's a fish. They're flowing. They can move around. It's fine.
So you really didn't focus any heat to, like, for the Celia at all?
None. Nope. And then I do a bottom fin, which has an unfortunate name. And then we do a dorsal fin, which is that top fin. And then I do a big blob for the tail, because you always want a little bit more material for the tail. It's an anal fin. Yep.
You had to ask.
Dorsal fin is just so... I did. I brought it up. That's a scientifically accurate problem again. So a big blob for the tail. I forgot to use your scissors earlier, Chris. We'll use them for the fish. Alright, so now I switch, and I'm just, again, keeping general heat in the piece. I'm not overheating one thing. I'm not melting in the color I have because I want it to have relief. And yeah, I know those seals are very stressful to a Boro worker who looks at that and goes, that's going to crack. Not with this.
I was more worried how cold it is, and then you're sticking a hot blob of glass on it.
I have it just warm enough, so it's not below 1,000 degrees for sure. Freezing cold. But it's also not hot. It's not like if I could tap on it, it would make a ting ting ting, and it's still not going to shock with that. So blob of green. And again, some people do their dot application very gently and detailed, mannered, and I don't. As scientifically accurate as I am organic when it comes to the building of things. usually do at least, I could get away with just this amount of glass for fins, but I like three layers. So you can't see on the side here, I just stuck that really hot tip of glass. I made a nice shape against the blue one and it stuck to it. And when that cools, I'll just bang it and they'll pop apart because that was too cold to seal. But it did stick to it to start. So we're just keeping the fish warm. And the light green goes on top. If you get the fins that you're adding glass to too warm, when you're trying to apply your new color, you'll actually pull away some of the color that's on there. So you actually do need it to be pretty firm so that your hot glass doesn't meld and pull away any of the glass you've already applied. I find that if I'm using really light colors in soft glass, that happens really fast. Like if I have white fins and then I try and add an orange layer to something, I'll usually pull white off instead of adding enough orange. Bottom strip. And then the last for the tail. So we've gone pectoral fin, anal fin, dorsal fin for the whole pattern, and then tail, until we go to the shaping of them, and then I go in reverse. I shape the tail because it will require the most heat, and so if you do it last, you'll melt out the definition you have in everything else. And then same for the top, you end up working up there too long and melting out definition. So we're going to heat up the tail now, and you see I have this really long tail stalk, and I'm just going to keep flipping it back and forth and kind of consolidating on itself. I could have been better about keeping it consolidated as I added, but it's showy like this. And occasionally still getting heat in the rest of him, just to make sure his lips don't get cold. I mean, he's already got blue lips. He doesn't have to be cold too. Thank you for the small chuckle. Bad joke.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
Pretty dismal, but it's okay.
Fish get cold, Celia?
Fish can get cold. When they get cold, they get really dumb and they start swimming slower and not in an even line. And then eventually they just pass out.
It's like a chihuahua, Chris.
Pretty much.
It's called cold stunning. When you have fish that get too cold, colder and colder, and then they just, all right, all done. So we've got that tail pretty nicely consolidated, and I know that when I go in here with the scissors, the shears, these are shears, not scissors. I use a pair of bonsai shears on my flame bench. These are much nicer. That it's going to push back a little bit as I try and cut it, so then I just cut it in half, and that gives me the two parts for the tail. And now I heat up one half of the tail and then the other to add the definition. And I always use these tiny tweezers that came in my first kit that don't have ribs on the inside to add texture to the fins, because then I don't get any ribbed texture, but you can have ribbed texture that's still very fin-like. If you're gonna add points to the tail, that's actually the very last thing you do. So if I wanted really fine points to his fins, I would add those very last, because otherwise that next little bit of touch of the tweezers when it's that cold and the whole thing's not hot will give you stress fractures, or just the tips will break free while you're working on the rest of them. That's too far away from the body to be warm, stable. These get a little hot, so I dip them in water sometimes. Now side fins. The side fins are the trickiest because it feels like you have to get your fingers closer to the glass than you ever think you want to. And the left fin is always easier because it's lined up nicely. The right fin, I always think, is a little like Nemo. It's never as nice on the other side. Oh, and the side fins, you've got to get one and done. You can't add points and stuff to those. They're too close to the heat of the body, so they reflect heat, and they'll melt out your definition and slump on you faster than you can blink at it. All right. What do we think? Does he need a pointy tail, or is he good with his rounded tail?
I think he needs a pointy tail so I can see it, but you gotta do the eyes first.
Nope. Eyes are last. Otherwise, you run the risk of blurring your eyes. Your eyes have to have definition. So you don't want to be like building heat back in your body if you've got eyes there, because I should say, if I was building a eye iris pupil, I build eye iris and then very last pupil, because that's what you need to be sharp. But these, I just have the one black, so it's going to be just pupils. Boop. Nice tail. This is bigger than I meant it to be, but that's okay. So I'm just going to get the very edge of this hot, because I really don't need very much black. Thank you. That is much pointier. That's much nicer.
And that black is from that bottle you were talking about.
St. Brennan's Irish Cream. So if you're asking a bar near you, that's the bottle you want. And then a little dot, pull back. Little dot, pull back. That was a little less nice. And then to get that final niceness, I just heat up one side of the eye and I press it flat. And then I heat up the other eye and press it flat. And that gives you your definition. One eye is bigger than the other because normally I have a stringer of that.
I love it.
But then that's fish.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Isn't that cute? I very much like making fish. I've made them in all colors. I've made them in all shapes. I've made betas with the tails that are the whole thing all together. I've made koi fish. I've made them all.
You gave me a beautiful fish.
I like making them so much. All right. And we're going to do the neck of the bottle next, because if you're going to use bottle glass, you need to know about that. All right. Here we go. Go away. All right. So something I missed that was important is if you're going to use the neck of a bottle, it's going to feel good to use the neck of the bottle because it's one of the thickest parts of the glass. So the neck of your bottle and the heel of your bottle are the thickest portions of the glass. And so you have to heat them up more slowly. If you have a really thick champagne bottle that you want to use the bottom of, bring it up in a kiln and then stab it with a hot piece of boro and pull it out to work with it, or the grabbers, and then add it to boro to build it up. But the necks of bottles are really dangerous, even though they're like one of the best bits to use because they're a funnel. So if you're gonna use the neck of a bottle, you can accidentally funnel the flame directly to your fingers. I broke this earlier, which is annoying because it would have been the perfect piece to use. So I broke that in two, which is much safer. But if this was in the grabbers, I would make sure that the wide part was towards me because that'll dissipate anything you accidentally blow back at yourself. Actually, I'm just going to do this whole thing. We're going to turn this off real quick. And we're going to pop the top of this neck off and use that because I think this is a really important thing. And then we'll make a shard bead, which I haven't shown off yet. More things to see. Okay, come on. Score. You can also see that it's harder to score on the neck because it's in that dip. So we're careful about that. That is not centered. Centered enough. I like those little bungee stomp. That's nifty. Don't ever have to worry about the lighter being on the desk.
Yeah, that's great.
So good. All right. Spin, bring it right down, and this is most likely to pop off and get away rather than sitting nicely. So sometimes we're ready to just ricochet that back away from ourselves. You don't have to catch it, you just have to play defense. Just when you think it won't work. It always takes a little bit longer the thicker the glass is. Play defense. And yeah, so you're most likely to have your least even cracking at that thick to thin connection of the bottle. So you can see this did not crack where I scored it at all. It just decided I can't handle that. That wasn't a defined enough indication of where you wanted me to crack. But I will heat up to the point where I pop somewhere along there of that thick to thin connection. So that's all spider webby. That'll fall apart into shards. But this is the thing we want to play with. All right, this is great glass to use because it's the most concentrated, the least work you have to do to build up a lot of material if you're making something big. But it is a gosh darn funnel. And it's thicker, so you have to introduce it a little more slowly into the flame. And so I just want to show you my hand angles because I'm a big proponent of seeing what someone is talking about rather than just having it described. Big flame, mandrels. Really? Come on. You can tell it's pretty strong, where that was molten when it got dropped in there, and it still was like, I'm gonna stay attached. Alright. So, you want to make sure that you're doing the bounce, bounce, bounce on this pretty easily. And you're gonna do it further out on the flame to start. It's harder to do it far away from yourself. You don't really have enough control with something this thick, so doing it on the side, making sure there's nobody in the splash zone is fine. And then it is just so much thicker. But what you don't want to do is ever angle it like this. One, it'll run that heat so fast up the side like it just did, and it's gonna funnel that flame directly back to your hand. So on something that flares to a wider neck faster, it's gonna get you. So either ricochet that heat off, but it feels like when we're taught to heat things evenly, that means you should heat the other side, especially when you can't turn it in the round, and that's when you'll get to your fingers. I took a lot of hand hair off once with that. But you can see that even though I cracked it, because I only cracked it on that one side, don't make a fool of me now, I can still heat it up and get it to stay. And so as I get it to stay, thick to thin connections are really hard. So one of the things you have to be careful about with the neck is that it is way more likely to do this to you. The walls of the bottle are going to be really easy. The top and the bottom, where it has all this thick to thin, is going to want to be temperamental. Sorry, hot start in my lap. Is going to want to be temperamental. And so even though it's still great glass to use, you just have to do so with more care. And so you can see the thread starting to heat up. I'm watching more spiderweb cracks get away from me, and I'm not going to worry about it too much. As soon as I get this mandrel adhered to it, I can worry about it less. I just really want to sink the mandrel in. And then I can start to work it in the round further from my hand once it's on the mandrel. And so the Boro mandrels that I brought with me, the Boro rods to build off of, are about as short as I would ever use them. Once they're this short, I would either attach them to it themselves or just start with new rods to make sure that it's always that far away from me. Because like you can see how much I can direct that flame. Like I can bend it back at myself with this. And if you were working on a much larger flame or with a much bigger bottle, like I did this once on a Carlisle and I angled the flame out to here. It's so much in the space you'd usually work that you just need to be so careful. But it is
Split right down the middle there, isn't it?
Yeah, you can see all those spiderweb cracks and shadows, really makes a difference. So, but again,
Was
this,
that on the seam that split?
no, it's where I was holding it with the cold.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then the crack on the other side was where I angled the hot through and it ran that hot line down the side of it. But the reason you want to use the neck is because it is just so much more glass than the wall of a bottle, so it does build up way faster. So if you're making things like big glass flowers or really big leaves or whatever you choose to make, you just build that material so fast. Could even just make slump looking bottle parts. So the necklace that is sitting on the table behind me is a piece that I made towards the end of the lockdowns, and it is a necklace made out of one entire wine bottle. I broke the wine bottle down into sections. I took every bit of it and pulled it into rod. I was very careful not to waste any ends and other bits, as I've been a little less strict with myself today just to show the process. And I made the entire bottle into beads. It made 282 beads total. I counted them. It took me a solid week of making beads every day, all day, and the breakdown of the material itself. The empty weight of a wine bottle is about 2.5 pounds on average. And then I took those 282 beads, I wove them into one strand that is just over 19 feet long, and then I married the ends of that strand to make one necklace. The original idea was to be worn by multiple people, to string it across a little friend group, but you have to wrap it on yourself if you want it to be even slightly functional and be able to walk in it at least 5 times to be able to wear the necklace. And the title of that piece is called The Weight, which is a slight play on words for the actual weight of the necklace itself. So it's not often that you wear a necklace that weighs 2.5 pounds. But the value in that bottle was not the fact that it was free material, but it was who I shared the wine with. So at the end of the lockdowns, that was the first bottle of wine I shared with friends once we were all vaccinated and could get back together. And so it wasn't the weight of how heavy it was how long we waited to get to be together again, which is why the necklace is made to be worn by multiple people as a way of keeping us all together. And it's definitely one of my favorite things I've made out of recycled glass, because once you start making things out of reclaimed glass, out of recycled glass, out of broken glass that you found or loved, it holds more than just the memory of making. It holds what was before it. So you find yourself looking at glass in a much more sentimental manner. And so I've done things like taken the toast bottle of champagne from a friend's wedding and made them a goblet out of it to keep on their mantelpiece. As, you know, you don't want to put just an empty wine bottle on your mantle. That kind of looks like a piece of trash. But remade into something that's a treasure but holds all that sentimentality is what I found really fun about working with a lot of glass. You start looking at glass very differently. And so I have a whole stash of glass that I have planned for different projects, and they all have labels on them, because you say you'll remember which each one is, and you might, but you might not also label stuff. It helps so much. So you can see how much longer this was from a much smaller piece because that glass was so dense. And then, so those sentimental pieces become so much more special when they're reworked. And oftentimes, as glass artists, we get asked all the time, I have this piece of glass I love, I broke it, can you fix it? And a lot of glass blowers have a lot of feelings about that question, because the usual answer is no. You don't know what kind of glass it was, you don't know the process it was made. it would probably be faster to remake one than it would be to fix something. But if you're not looking to put something back as it was, you can make something just as special. And so what I've done with things that people have sent me where they had a sentimental piece of glass or a piece of glass they treasured and they smashed it, is I have made them something wearable out of it. And so I'm not going to throw these because they will not roll evenly. But these are what I call shard beads. And so you can make reclamation necklaces. You can pass those around, share them. And so this is the one time I work really directly with shards. We're just going to leave that on a pilot light for a second while I go over this. And so these pieces were mailed to me by a friend. And she had this art glass bowl in her house that she bought from an artist somewhere, sometime, that she loved. And then in a move, I believe, it got broken. And she had the shards of this piece for years before she knew that I was making anything out of glass. And then once she heard, she asked if I would make her something from that. And so it takes a little bit of cautious and care because this is art glass, but furnace glass, not meant for the torch. But because I can work with bottle glass, I can work with any kind of glass. The only glass you shouldn't work with at the torch is laminated glass. So like if your windshield broke, one, maybe let's not commemorate a car crash, but also that has a layer of plastic in the middle. Don't put that in the torch, it's toxic to breathe and it'll leave you smuts. But if you just have a drinking glass that was your grandmother's favorite, if you have an art piece of glass in your home that you broke, if you've got a window that you looked through forever, a bottle of wine you shared with friends, anything that has that sentimental value you can use. And so this is the time I really use shards. Like this is a perfect shard to use already. I don't have to change that shape. But this is when I use a hammer. We're going to do this gently, and we're going to break off what we hope are triangular-ish pieces. If you don't want to take it with a hammer, you can get a tile nipper or cane cutters for glass artists, and you can try and cut off triangular-shaped pieces. You just see what it'll give you. Like that's a fine shape. So just kind of work around the piece. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but the more triangular, the more dynamic your bead will be. So you can draw on it with the glass cutter and try and tap it free, but depending on how even the walls are, the more even the walls, the more you can cut it into triangles. But if you want that, I just smashed my favorite object, irregularity and organicness. A hammer or just the pieces as they've already smashed are the way to go. You take those pieces, you lay them out to where you can see them and choose them, and then you're going to approach it differently than you would, and with more caution, I'm not going to put that back up where you moved it, than you would something you're just breaking down into rod. And so this is where, having practiced with a lot of glass you're unfamiliar with, and really proving how much control you have and how well you can read a piece of glass, is going to shine through. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my triangles, we'll use this kind of blunt-ended triangle. We're going to make sure there's not any dust on it. I'm not being too careful, but you don't want any big oily fingerprints or really obvious dust. Hold it in either tweezers or my grabber to start. And I'm going to heat up that leading edge. And that's not enough. You're going to make sure you have enough bead release. That is just enough. Bead release on your piece. And you're just going to wind this shard up as best you can. So it might have some air pockets in it, that's fine. But you've got to be really intentional, really gentle. It'll have cracks you can't anticipate where it has stress in the glass from where it's smashed. That's fine. But you want to make sure the whole edge is hot. The whole bead release is hot. So you can see that glow in the blue right there. Start to see the glow in the bead release. I'm going to do this a little more hot this Christmas thing. But do this. So you can see I have this little corner piece that's trying to edge up. That was silly. We don't need that, but that's okay. It can stay there. It's not going to hurt anything. Get that hot all the way along, and then just tap it down. Now the thing you're not going to do in this moment is just let go with your grabbers. This is really awkward for anyone who uses a mandrel because this looks all the way wrong. You should never be on just one side of your bead release. You shouldn't be holding it with something else. But if you just let go now, it would be too much weight on your bead release, and you would break it off, actually. I might adjust, but I think I can still save it. It's not about what you can make, it's about what you can save. So you're gonna heat that up and slide to wrap. Oh, I'm gonna break this bead release, okay. And once you have it about halfway around, you can let go. So long as the glass isn't hot enough to fuse down to that metal, a little bit of bead release on the broken edge is okay. You can grind that off later. And I'm just slowly moving that heat down through the shard and turning as I do so. And that's just gonna tack it, fuse it all the way around. And you want a triangle so that it is reducing in size so that you see your layers. If you start it the other way, you end up with something really narrow in the center with this really wide flab on the other side. And because I'm not superheating that, I don't have to worry about the fact that it's near the metal there. And this is something that looks really simple, and the first time you try it, call me afterwards because it's humbling, to say the least. And then you end up with these really organic, but really kind of captivating shard beads. And they keep whatever pattern you have. They show that it was a broken thing made whole once more. You get it really just kind of cool, and then you chuck it in the annealer. And once you get going in these, once you've been working with the same kind of glass for half an hour to an hour, you start to move a lot faster because you can read this piece of glass. So it's a really good exercise in control to move through different types of glass to see that your habits can work with all of it pretty easily. So I'll leave that there. Pop that in the annealer. And if you have a very special piece of glass and limited quantity of it, and you don't know what it is, always err on the side of caution of making just a couple beads and throwing them in the annealer, and then coming back the next day to make sure they didn't all shatter based on how fast you cooled them, because it can be wildly different for the different temperatures, and especially because we're cold sealing them, it'll really tune in your cool down schedule. And so with that, you'll be able to see whether or not you don't want to make it all and then have it all break in the annealer. So don't use your whole piece in one day. It's basically not all your eggs in one basket. It was just Easter. That's fitting. So you can also, instead of going from the side, if you're more comfortable from the top, you can, but you've got to be careful again just to heat up those edges. I like the shape of this shard. The only problem with using a lot of reclaimed glass is you do become a bit of a hoarder.
I think you can just remove reclaimed from that sentence and it works.
Yeah, once you start to work with glass, something happens and you just accumulate. Oops, got my tool too close to the heat. Come off. Don't do this to me, thank you. That was gonna be embarrassing. Mess up the tool, that's fine. They've seen much worse. So if you do start working with this really fast, you can occasionally leave the edge slightly too sharp. So always make sure you just flash those really sharp edges nicely to make sure that they round out. See, that was a nice shaped shard. You don't usually think you'll end up really liking the shape of broken glass. But sometimes when you have a really uneven piece, like this piece was that art plate, it's got that big clear glob on it, that's going to be the bit of it I don't use. That really thick to thin, I'm not going to be able to put that anywhere near the flame without it just entirely detonating. The thicker the glass is, the more power it has to blow up, and so the more caution you have to have putting it in the flame. Really thin glass, the thinner the better, no problem. Just takes longer to build up your materials. The thicker it is, more caution. Otherwise it will bang.
Have you ever had that happen on a large piece? Get burned about that?
I had it happen on the bottom of a large champagne bottle. I put it right in the flame, mostly not thinking I was going to heat it up in one, but then I was going to have other smaller pieces to then use. And no, it blew up and it almost looked like tempered glass from the side windows of a car, the way it blew up. So it wasn't super sharp. The pieces were really small. It had so much tension in it. And it made a loud noise, let me tell you. But in that instance, the pieces weren't hot enough. The biggest burns I've had, I have a couple little marks on the insides of my arms where your arms are resting open. And that's been from when I've been heating these up and I've gotten overconfident and they pop back further, but this edge is really, really hot. That tacky glass will stick to your skin. And I burnt myself on those pieces. The thicker it is, it could cut you. When it blows up, likely it is that you're not going to have it hot enough to burn yourself with before it blows up. You'd have to heat it up slowly and then introduce it to the flame to have it hot enough to blow up and burn you. Otherwise, it's just going to be percussive, a mess to clean up, and possibility of cutting you, depending on, like the bottom of the champagne bottle that blew up was really small because of how much tension, but something like the neck of a bottle would be razor sharp all over when it blew up if you introduced it too fast. These are really satisfying because it just lets you roll the mandrel so slowly. Normally when you're rolling it, it's this fast, keep it round, keep it center, keep it moving, and you're just like, nah. All right, we're right at time with this last shard bead. Anybody have any other questions for me? Are we wrapping it? Oh yeah, let's show them off. All right, just pop this last bead in the annealer. There we go. All right, so I've made these series of goblets. They're all slightly different. The first one that I made that was a bottle goblet was this one. And if you haven't heard of the Secret Goblet Society, it's a little quieter at the moment, but it's a wonderful society of goblet enthusiasts, whether you make glass or not. Stop ringing. And it is run by an anonymous individual. They post pictures of people's goblets from the entire glass community, from freshmen to people that have been working in glass longer than I've been alive, all the aesthetic, but what you have to have in order to be a goblet is a cup, a stem, and a foot. And so if it meets those criteria, it can end up on the Secret Goblet Society. And while we were all in lockdown, while we were waiting to do things, they decided to host competitions, and they put up parameters for your goblets. And so with all these different categories, it had options of things you had to meet. So for this one, my criteria that I chose, there were a bunch of different ones. One of them was that it had to be kinetic, which is why it's a bell on the inside. The other was that it had to be recycled materials. And the third criteria I filled was decadent. That was up to interpretation, as I recall. But that just meant really elaborate. And so that with all that extra beading in there. And this had been something I've been thinking about making for a long time. And so just that little push did that. And I'll toot my own horn and say this won second place in Secret Goblet Society. The one that won that time had magnets. That was their kinetic. It was between the step and the foot, and it was replaceable pieces of the goblet, and I really liked that. That was excellent. That was a furnace goblet. But so for these, the bottom of the bottle becomes the cup, the top of the bottle becomes the stem, and then the shoulder of the bottle becomes that flare to the foot. And I'm pretty particular about which bottles I use. If you use a wine bottle that kind of has that classic wine bottle shape, you end up with a really weird bell foot that is uncomfortable, but when you have that gradual swooping shoulder, you end up with a really satisfying goblet. And then this one was the next iteration of that because I decided this one was not decadent enough. So I added, and so when I made these goblets, it is the entire wine bottle. And so all this extra ornamentation is made from the same glass. It's just that little section of center that was left over when I broke it apart to reassemble it. And so these was a series of 3. The third one was in a different box somewhere at home, and so that didn't come. But it was earth, water, and growth. And so there was one that was meant to look more earthy, so the darkest green that I could find, and that really grounded ornamentation. Water as flowing and dripping as it could look in the blue bottle, and then there's a very light green bottle that is its third companion, which has all of its ornamentation on the cup. The entire cup is covered and looks much more like a flowering tree, if you will. It's in a slightly lighter shade than this, and it's a much larger, it was like a liter wine bottle, so it's quite large for that growth aspect of it. And so this has been a really fun project. I have a few more goblets in the work and a few more that I have completed in a series of these, and I almost have enough of my recycled glass art, including my necklace and my footprints and my goblets, to have an entire solo show of reclaimed recycled glass art. That is TBD when that will be displayed. But I hope by the end of the year I'll have enough completed to actually do all of that. So that's the next goal with all of these, is to bring all of this work together. Because right now I make it, and then to keep it safe I have to put it away somewhere, and I don't get to see it all together. So actually having it all back out is always really exciting. So that's what's next for these. Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming. Hang out if you have more questions for me, and find me online if you have even more questions, because I'm always happy to geek out.
Bye.